There are moments in sports that have nothing to do with sports. Moments where the game stops being a game and becomes something rawer, something more human, where the scoreboard goes dark in the back of your mind and all that remains is one person, in one room, trying to find words for something that words were never quite built to carry. This was one of those moments. Pitcher Sheehan's exit was sudden. That is the only word for it. One moment he was part of the game, part of the plan, part of the rhythm that a professional baseball team builds across 9 innings, and the next moment he wasn't. The dugout felt it. The bullpen felt it. The entire Dodgers organization felt it in the particular way that unexpected departures are always felt, not just as a roster decision or a medical event, but as a human disruption. A reminder that behind every uniform is a person, and that person's situation is bigger than any single game. When Shohei Ohtani was summoned to the locker room shortly after, the American media was waiting. They are always waiting. Microphones ready. Cameras steady. Questions prepared. What they were not prepared for, what nobody in that room was fully prepared for, were the words that came next. Not because they were dramatic. Not because they were carefully constructed for maximum impact. But because they were quiet. And honest. And they landed the way that quiet, honest things always land when everything around them has been loud and uncertain, like a hand placed gently on a shoulder in a difficult moment. Like something true spoken in a room that needed it. The American media left that locker room differently than they entered it. Some of them said so publicly afterward. Some of them didn't need to say anything. It was visible. And it raises a question that statistics have never been able to answer and highlight reels have never been able to capture. Who, exactly, is Shohei Ohtani when the game is no longer the point? To understand what Ohtani said in that locker room, you first have to understand what his departure meant inside that dugout. Professional baseball teams are, by design, built to absorb disruption. Rosters shift. Players go on the injured list. Pitchers get pulled mid-inning. Lineup changes happen without warning. The system is designed to keep moving because stopping is not an option when there is a game to finish and a season to protect. Every player on a major league roster has internalized this, the professional obligation to compartmentalize, to set personal reactions aside, to stay locked into what the next play requires. But there are limits to compartmentalization. And Sheehan's sudden exit tested those limits in the Dodgers dugout in a way that was visible to anyone paying attention. Because what happened to Sheehan was not a routine roster move. It was not a scheduled decision or a strategic adjustment. It was sudden. And sudden departures, the kind that happen without warning, that pull a teammate out of a shared moment without the ordinary transitions that make change bearable, do something to a team that no amount of professional composure can fully suppress. They make everyone aware, all at once, that this is not just a job. That the person who was standing next to you in the bullpen, or sitting 2 lockers down, or warming up on the mound while you tracked his mechanics from the dugout, that person is carrying something real. And whatever they are carrying matters. It matters independently of what the scoreboard says. It matters independently of what the season needs. It matters because they are a person, and you are a person, and in that locker room after the game, there is no way to pretend otherwise. That was the atmosphere Ohtani walked into. That was the weight in the room when the American media gathered and the cameras came on and everyone waited to see what the best player in baseball would do with a moment that had nothing to do with baseball. The details of exactly what Ohtani said have moved through the baseball world quickly, shared, discussed, translated, interpreted. But the details alone do not capture what made those words land the way they did. Because the words themselves, removed from context, removed from the tone and the timing and the expression on his face as he spoke them, are simple. They are not elaborate. They are not the kind of carefully crafted statement that a public relations team constructs in the hours after a difficult event. They are the words of someone who genuinely meant them. And that, in a media environment where athletes are coached from an early age to say the right things in the right order, to protect themselves and their organizations through the careful management of language, is rarer than it sounds. What came through most clearly, to the reporters in that room and to everyone who has heard or read his words since, was not sympathy in the performed sense. It was not the obligatory expression of concern that teams and athletes produce because the situation requires it. What came through was something more specific and more personal. It was care. The kind of care that does not announce itself, that does not position itself for public consumption, that simply exists, in the words chosen, in the pauses between them, in the willingness to speak about a teammate's situation with the kind of directness that only comes when you have actually thought about it, actually felt it, actually let it matter to you. The American media, collectively, has seen a great many post-game locker room statements. They have heard athletes navigate difficult questions with professional precision, deflecting and redirecting and staying carefully on message. What they heard from Ohtani in that moment was not navigation. It was presence. He was fully there, in that room, with that situation, without any apparent interest in managing how his words would be received. That is what left people in tears. Not the words themselves, but the absence of performance behind them. The public image of Shohei Ohtani is, understandably, built around what he does on the field. The home runs. The strikeouts in his pitching years. The historic statistical seasons. The awards and the records and the moments that make highlight packages and front pages. That image is accurate as far as it goes. What it does not fully capture is the Ohtani that his teammates describe in quieter settings, the one who exists in the spaces between at-bats and innings and games. Those who have shared a locker room with him, who have been around him across the long, grinding, 162-game grind of a major league season, describe something that does not always make it into the broadcasts. They describe a person who pays attention. Who notices when a teammate is struggling, not just mechanically but personally. Who shows up in small ways that accumulate over a season into something that teammates feel without always being able to articulate why. He remembers things. He remembers what a teammate mentioned in passing 3 weeks ago. He asks follow-up questions that nobody expected him to still be thinking about. He engages with the people around him not as background figures in his own story but as people whose situations he has actually absorbed and filed away and returned to. For someone who operates under the level of attention and pressure that Ohtani does, someone who cannot go anywhere in a baseball stadium without being the focal point of every eye in the building, this quality is not small. It is, in fact, extraordinary. Because attention is finite. It is a resource. The amount of attention required to be Shohei Ohtani in a public sense, to perform at the level he performs, to manage the media obligations, to carry the expectations of 2 countries and an entire franchise, that attention budget could easily consume everything he has. Most people in his position would be forgiven for having very little left over for the quieter, less visible work of being genuinely present to the people around them. He has left over. He has more than left over. And Sheehan's situation brought that quality into public view in a way that nothing on a baseball field ever could. It is worth pausing on this. The American sports media is not, as a professional culture, easily moved. These are people who have covered thousands of games, hundreds of press conferences, countless post-game locker room sessions in which athletes say meaningful-sounding things that mean very little. They have developed, by necessity, a calibrated skepticism. A professional distance. An ability to receive what athletes say and evaluate it against what athletes do, against the broader pattern of behavior that context provides. When members of that press corps come out of a locker room visibly affected, when the reaction is not professional evaluation but something more personal, something that catches people off guard, it means something. It means that what they encountered inside did not fit the expected pattern. It means that the usual distance collapsed, not because someone tried to collapse it, but because something genuine entered the room, and genuine things have a way of bypassing professional armor. Ohtani did not try to move anyone. That is the point. He was not performing emotion for the cameras. He was not calculating how his words would translate into headlines or how his public image might benefit from being seen as compassionate and human in a difficult moment. He was simply responding, as himself, to a situation that had affected him. And the authenticity of that response, unmanaged, unpolished, not built for consumption, is precisely what made it so powerful to the people in the room. You cannot manufacture that reaction. You cannot plan for it or produce it on command. It exists only when the person speaking is genuinely, completely present, when there is no gap between what they feel and what they say, no layer of management between the interior experience and the words that come out. In a media landscape built largely around that gap, its absence is startling. It reminds people, reporters included, why they cared about sports in the first place. There is a version of Shohei Ohtani that is easy to construct from the outside. The version built entirely from numbers and awards and superlatives. The version that is best understood as a phenomenon, something unprecedented in the history of the game, a player whose combination of abilities has no real comparison, whose career is best described in statistics that have no prior context because nobody has ever done what he has done. That version is real. The numbers are real. The history is real. But it is incomplete in a way that the locker room moment with the American media made suddenly, unexpectedly visible. Because what that moment showed, what those words in that room revealed, is that behind the phenomenon is a person who has not been consumed by it. A person who, despite everything that being Shohei Ohtani in 2025 requires and demands and extracts, has retained the capacity to be genuinely moved by someone else's difficulty. To feel it. To let it matter. To walk into a room full of cameras and microphones and say something honest about it without any apparent concern for how the honesty lands. That is not a given. Fame of the magnitude Ohtani carries has a well-documented tendency to narrow the interior world, to make everything smaller, everything more self-referential, everything filtered through the question of how it affects the person at the center. The history of professional sports is full of talented people who were changed by what their talent produced. Changed in ways that separated them gradually from the ordinary human texture of caring about others, of being present to other people's situations, of feeling things that have nothing to do with their own performance or their own story. Ohtani, in that locker room, showed something different. He showed that the scale of what he has achieved has not closed him off. That the attention has not turned inward in the way it so often does. That somewhere inside the historic seasons and the unanimous MVP votes and the record-breaking contracts, there is still a person who can be summoned to a locker room after a teammate's sudden exit and respond not as an icon, not as a franchise player protecting his image, but simply as a human being who was affected by what happened to someone he cares about. That is the thing the scoreboard cannot measure. That is the thing no award captures. And that, more than any home run or strikeout or stolen base, is what the American media carried out of that locker room with them. Some things in baseball are about baseball. And some things remind you that baseball, at its best, is just the frame around something much larger, the story of people, under pressure, revealing who they actually are. In that locker room, after Sheehan's sudden exit, Shohei Ohtani revealed exactly who he is. And it left everyone in tears.